Hopefully, this will be a series of roundtables that we do with industry leaders to talk about the issues facing design firms. And so this is it. This is our initial cast. You're all, I'm sure, super grateful to be on from your homes. And that is the subject of today's call, which is the whole working from home situation that we're all going through. And joining us today, we have Sharon Murphy from Pfeiffer Partners, who's a principal at Pfeiffer Partners. Hi, Sharon.
Hello.
We have the Director of Operations from Architects Orange, Brendan Farrell.
Now AO.
Okay, AO, sorry. And then we have Monica Cuervo, who is an MD at WATG. And
hello.
Finishing off the letter soup, we have John Robeson, the COO, sorry.
Wait, are we charging people?
Careful.
The COO, yeah, I know, sorry. The COO of KTGY.
Right.
So I thought if we could just get started a little bit, can you just give a brief rundown of where your firm is in terms of the workforce and where you are in the planning process in terms of bringing them back in? And by that I mean, are your plans completely finalized? Is it still sort of a nebulous situation? What is your stance currently in regards to the discussion about bringing people back in? And I'll just start with Sharon.
Yes. So we have about 50 people across 2 offices, and I guess you can say our plans as far as coming back are a moving target. We've made plans and we've set dates and we've moved the dates and we've moved the dates and we've moved the dates. Our current date is in August, and I guess the way things are in Los Angeles right now, we're not sure if we're going to be able to stick with that. It's our intention that we would bring both offices back at the same time. So that, I guess, causing the uncertainty. We have made a lot of plans. We've done floor layouts of our offices. We've rearranged seating assignments to allow for social distancing. We've made plans for pathways to walk around the offices and some of the other things that are suggested. And so I think we're ready in that sense.
But you're still probably a month plus out from. Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, and then just as an FYI, you're a little bit quiet, so I'm not sure how far from the mic you are, but you're coming across a little bit quiet for me. Sorry.
Okay.
Brendan at AO, same question.
So AO, we're about 300 people now. I may come across as loud, so let me know if that's the case. So at AO, we're about 300 people across 5 buildings in downtown Orange, or in the Old Town Center of Orange. And we started bringing people back as soon as OC entered phase, whatever it was, I think phase 2 that allowed us to open. And we started bringing people back in small batches. And we have slowly been building that up. Every 2 weeks, we bring back hundreds of people. We, of course, did a study beforehand, set up all the protocols about how we introduce temperature check and put a plexiglass where it made sense, and all of those things. And of course, we can't get into place like hand sanitizer and all of that stuff. And so we were on par to bring about 65% of the city with the social distancing in place. We were just beginning to slow down how many people we were bringing back because we had gotten to the point where it became a little bit of an issue, that type of thing. And then 2 weeks ago, we had a because they were feeling too well. And sure enough, I'm not quite sure where that's coming from.
Yeah, sorry, but I don't know if anybody's else having difficulty, but it got sort of choppy in there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very, very faint.
You're very faint? Why don't you go to somebody else?
Okay.
And see if that happens.
You got it. That's a great segue to Monica. And you, so there's some differences here, right? So Sharon has 2 offices to worry about, LA and New York. Brendan has everything's concentrated in Orange. WTG is global. So how is that impacted?
So WATG, we have 11 offices across the globe. There's 450 staff across the globe. I think out of all the offices, we have all the offices that have opened so far in a phase 1 opening. We've kind of taken it in phases depending on the country and the location because it's different. Even within the United States, we have our New York office, we have Honolulu, and then California, which are all in different stages overall relative to their situation. So I'll speak for California, our Irvine location. We have about 120 employees there in our Irvine office. And we have opened our phase 1 4 weeks ago. This will be our 4th week of phase 1. And what we call that is 20% of our total capacity. We opened, and that allows us a maximum of 25 staff at any given time. So the way we set it up is that it's a concierge style where you check in with our lead receptionist, and she keeps a tally of who's coming and who's going. We do have set work hours, which have been taken a little bit of getting used to because we've always been very open in terms of our office. But people have respected those work hours, and we do temperature checks. And as Sharon was saying, we have all the signage within the office relative to maximum capacity in the various meeting rooms, at the touchdown tables, etc. Face masks are required, except for at your specific desk when you're actually sitting and not walking around. But when you're walking around, face mask definitely required. So really, and the thing is, we're also in an Irvine company building, so they have their standards and requirements as well, which we've been working very closely with them to make sure that we're all coordinated. But for the most part, I think this phase 1 is going well. We wanted to see how it went, and we were looking to potentially increase capacity in a couple of weeks. And so I think we're almost there. Relative, which would be phase 2 and be represented in about a 50% capacity.
Okay. So just a couple questions. So did you also do the sort of desk shuffle that other people, or no?
You know what, Mike? Because we had a partial capacity and we did concierge style, we were able to basically space out 25 people within the office. So we didn't have to do a big furniture shuffle. And also our workstations are such that they're about 5 feet apart from one another. Okay. So we were able to locate specific desks throughout the office and identify those so that people knew where they had to sit. But we haven't had any issue with that so far.
Whoever picked out those workstations made a really good choice.
I know.
So you did mention 20%, and so in my head that means you're doing 1/5 of the office every day of the week, or how is it just the same 20% constantly coming in, or?
It's a concierge style, because really the key is to make sure that we can trace the staff, to make sure that we know who's there when, just in case there is a COVID infection right. within the staff, that we know where to trace it from and who's been there and who's potentially impacted. So it really is signing in and letting our receptionists know who will be there at any one given day. And we haven't, 4 weeks into it, it's pretty much been the same group of staff. And then we have those individuals who come in for key meetings or printing, milestone printings, or just key conversations.
Okay. And so John at KTGY, similar, or?
Probably a mix of those various things. We had, Mike, I'm getting some feedback. Are you?
Sorry.
Okay. We had 6 offices across the country. And so like Monica, there were various scenarios, sort of circumstances at each one, and all quite different if you recall, a couple months ago when it started to feel like restrictions were going to be lifted, things were starting to ease up, we did start talking about sending people back. We had been doing sort of keeping our finger on the pulse of staff from as early as early March. So we had a kind of a sense of who was interested in coming back into the office and who wasn't. And it wasn't really very many. So we had planned to start bringing people back slowly as they desired. And we were going to start with our Denver office, which was the first one to sort of ease up on the restrictions. And then around that time is when there was a lot of the civil unrest. And since a lot of our offices are in downtown areas, it heightened the sense of anxiety. So we had to take a step back and kind of reconsider whether we wanted to do it. There was less urgency about it. There was less desire to go back. The truth is, we kind of kept asking ourselves, why would we go back into the office right now anyway? What are we trying to get out of this? So we surveyed the Denver staff, and they all were quite mixed. And it was about maybe 20% of the office said, yeah, we'd like to go back in sometimes, not all the time.
Right.
So we stuck with that, and we had already had guidelines in place for how to, create a safe work environment, et cetera. So we continue with the Denver staff. They've been there for about, they've been there for a few weeks now. But they're on a schedule. Some of them are Monday, Wednesday, some of them are Tuesday, Thursday. It's sort of up to them. And they have a seating assignment. Since there's only maybe 20% of the staff, it's been really easy to seat them and keep them spread out. And what we did is said, let's watch what happens in Denver for a little while, and let's not even discuss this until we've been there. So sometime next week, I think it's going to be back on the agenda to talk about whether we bring anybody back into other offices. I'm sure we'll do another survey at some point, but we're really taking it slowly to say what's the benefit of doing it, and is there any urgency to it? So right now it's just about 20% of one of the 6 offices.
Okay. And sorry, Brendan, coming back to you.
Is this better audio-wise?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great. So, we kind of had a mixture of basically what everybody's been saying so far. We started bringing people back, except the organization's attitude, both from our staff, and we did a lot of surveying as well, and also our leadership, was the majority of our people were anxious and eager to come back to work as soon as they could for whatever reason. That happens to be our culture. So we started bringing people back as soon as we were able to, and we brought back a small group, and we watched that. And just like everybody else had said, we follow guidelines, both jurisdictionally and the CDC guidelines, to the letter, and have done all of those things before people were able to come in. They had to fill out an online form. We tracked who was in the office, who was not in the office. Those who agreed to come back to the office signed a very specific return to work agreement, committing to certain actions that they would take. Then anybody outside of that cohort, if they were going to be coming into the office for whatever reason, would have to coordinate with the partner and myself. So we were always aware of who was on campus and where they were on campus. So we did that for a little while, and that went really well. So then we brought back another cohort in the middle of June, and that was also going extremely well. Everybody's been following the protocols, all of that type of thing. And so then the idea was actually this week we were going to have sort of a hey, everything's going really well, sort of a State of the Union, and invite even more people back, because at this point we were at about 40% capacity, which for us is around 120 people across the 5 buildings. We're not in Irvine Company properties or Class A buildings. We own a lot of our own buildings. They're old buildings in downtown Orem. So we were sort of in charge of the perimeter. But going beyond the 120, we wanted to be really careful, because despite the fact that there's plenty of room for the social distancing at people's workspace and things like that, traffic flow around restrooms, traffic flow around entry and exit points was getting to the point where we thought going much beyond the capacity we're at may start to become a problem for people. So just as we were starting to figure out how we were going to navigate the next part of that, with the idea going up to about 65% of our people over the course of July, which would have put us at capacity. We had a few people call in sick or say that they were going to go to get tested towards the end of June, and sure enough, one of our staff came back positive, at which point, confidence gets shattered among staff. We decided we were going to roll back. And right now we're back in the position that we were in the beginning, which was only people who really want to continue to come into the office are allowed. We've sort of shut everything down until July 20th. And then we'll reevaluate what we're going to do next. So our approach has really mirrored California's experience in terms of wanting to be there right in the front, and doing the best that we could to go as far and as fast as we safely could. But then, sure enough, it's a serious thing that we're dealing with. So now we have to take a few steps back.
Okay. So I think there's a couple common threads that I wanted to, and this is going to be a hard question. I think it's going to be hard. All of you, I think, indicated in some form that there was a survey process or there was a solicitation of feedback, from staff about how do you feel about, coming back, et cetera. Is that good corporate governance, or is that sort of an abdication of responsibility, or how do you, does anybody have any strong feelings on that? Because I've heard it both ways, right? I've heard it's great, it's the company cares, and et cetera. And I think there's also another section that are saying, the company should be decisive and shouldn't be putting the onus back on the staff to kind of contribute to those decisions. Does that resonate with anyone, or does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we didn't do a survey, actually.
Okay.
We just basically established what we felt was going to be safe for the firm and the staff, and really paid very close attention to what CDC, World Health Organization, was recommending. Because really the survey could go all over the map. I mean, you end up, actually, what we were looking at is that you have almost a 50-50 split. And sometimes people are reluctant to kind of give their true feelings related to the subject matter. And the reality is there's just so much that you don't know about the situation at the moment. So we didn't do a survey.
Well, I can say we did do a survey, but we considered it to be an informal one. We have stated that our policy is that we are going to return to the office. And the question is when we're going to do that, how we're going to do it, and how we can do it safely. And so I think we did not want the expectation to be that, that there was a plan other than returning to the office ultimately. And what we were doing was surveying how people were feeling in terms of how comfortable they were about it at that particular moment in time.
And that's part of the problem, right? The comfort level seems to go up and down on a near daily basis, which is a challenge. I guess the other question I wanted to ask is there a consistency in the job roles of the people that are wanting to come back into the office? Or is it just like, for instance, you're 20% or Brendan's 40%? Is it just a complete percentage slice of your normal job roles, or are there some job roles that are, so what comes to mind is heavy Revit users, for instance, they want to be in the office, or high graphics users want to be in the office. Maybe senior leaders come in occasionally for a meeting or a milestone check, but I'm just wondering if you're seeing any sort of imbalance, so to speak, of
we had early on been hearing from a lot of our senior leaders that we started to get the sense that they were the ones that wanted to get back into the office, and being next to the team. Sort of that's the way they were all used to working, and we felt that maybe it would be most of them and few of the younger or newer in their career staff. But when we did the survey, and even now we're still seeing this with the Denver office that went back, is that it is a fair cross section, and it's because it's not always around whether I want to be over the shoulder of one of my young architects, or I need faster access to the network or something like that. It's often about I need that social network around me, and I need the person to person, and we're getting that from every level, whether it's senior leaders or people who've been with us for a few years. So we in the office that went back, and from the survey office wide that we did, which by the way was really just to get a sense of who's even interested, because we put it out there with there is no expectation whatsoever. We found that it was a pretty broad cross section of everybody. It's a wide sample.
We approached it a little differently. We took a look at from the outset, because the belief was once we went home, there was a strong feeling that we were going to be in some variety of this situation for an extended period of time. So we sort of identified, all right, who can safely work at home for the longest amount of time, and then we focused on making the people of those who it made sense to bring back to the office, those people more heavily involved in production or in extensive collaborative work, among those who would be comfortable coming back in. And our survey at the outset was initially about understanding what people's personal restrictions were about, whether or not they were a caregiver at home, if they had children or things like that. What were the limitations in their own life that would prevent them from coming back to the office? And then among those who didn't have restrictions and were eager to come back to the office, then we talked about comfort level. And within that comfort level, those are the people that we identified to start coming back. Then of course, once some people were back for a little while, the comfort level in sort of the next tier grew, and more people were eager to come back to the office. I have actually been, I live in LA and work in Orange County. My wife is a doctor of public health, and it's a different world in LA than it is in OC in terms of the approach, communication, all of that type of stuff. I was actually quite surprised by the eagerness and the willingness and the almost, a desire really for the majority of our staff to get back.
Yeah. And I get the feeling, like, I think everybody's sort of tired of being cooped up, right? We want to get back to normal. We want to get back to the social. We want to stand around the water cooler. I think that's a pretty normal thing to do. So obviously, and all of this, to me, when I think of like the headaches that are associated with this, that just feels like, especially when you're dealing with 400, 500, or, even 50, just the logistics of tracking who's where and what they're comfortable with and when they're, et cetera, that seems like a nightmare, or at least very difficult. But aside from maybe those sort of black and white logistics, what are the biggest challenges that you've come across in just trying to get this shift into work from home functioning well for your firm? We'll go with John.
Sure. There's so many, whether it is the logistics, whether it's sort of moving things back and forth, or we were not in a position to have 100% of our staff be transient like that. So having the capacity to deal with that, people moving in and out of the office, whether they're, on logging in one day and not the next, things like that. But other challenges like, people with kids, or a home situation that doesn't allow them to be super flexible are the challenges. But right now, what I think is going to pose some of the bigger challenges in terms of process and culture would be having these, some of the team in the office, some of them at home, and not feeling totally connected, and maybe having some of the people feel a little bit alienated from the group. Maybe there's 3/4 of the team in the office and the rest are at home, but they're not even together. So I think some of those challenges of sort of dealing with the process and cultural issues are the ones that are going to start to be more difficult for us to address.
Monica, I saw you shaking your head. You have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with John. I mean, the reality is the actual workflow and moving to a work from home environment was very smooth. I think surprisingly smooth. The technology worked very well, and everybody was able to just hunker down and go. So we didn't run into a lot of hiccups in that sense. And now 4 months into it, because when we first went into it, we all kind of thought, oh, this is going to be 6 weeks and then we're done. And here we are 4 months later. So I think what John is mentioning is a little bit of what we're feeling is people have been overproductive, I think, and working an enormous amount of hours because they can. They continue to do so from home. And now it's really kind of trying to make sure that people are time managing, taking an opportunity to take breaks, stop for the weekend. And then I think just being able to connect socially. Mike, you're pretty familiar with our WATG culture. We do a lot in terms of socially connecting in the office, outside of the office, and people haven't been able to do that. So making sure that folks are comfortable with that if they can and how they can. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
And so Sharon and Brendan, sort of the same. It's more about the workflow and the process.
Well, I was just going to add on to that on the topic of time off and people thinking about that. We realized that our company policy has a maximum on the number of hours that you can accumulate on your vacation before you start to tap out and it no longer accumulates. And we literally just had a conversation about whether that should be increased so that people don't feel forced to use their vacation time in ways they prefer not to. But on the other hand, the fact that people are hitting those caps means they're not taking any time off. So, we're sort of having a conversation about that because we don't want people overworking. And we too have noticed that people are being very productive. We happen to have a number of projects that have had deadlines. So it's kind of hard to say, whether it's because of deadlines or just, because people can work. But I think there is a little bit of a concern about making sure people are taking breaks and not getting burned out at home.
Right. And Brendan, workflow, same?
It's been very good. I mean, to be honest with you, and Michael, you guys and your team were a great help to us right at the outset, because from an infrastructure point of view, AO was really only like 70% ready to have to deal with this. So we did a lot of sprinting at the outset, and you guys helped us out a lot with that. But then once we settled into it, everything went really well. Honestly, our biggest problems with the work from home environment have been sort of that 20% of people who are in the work from home methodology who, will come in for a meeting or end up being on the phone with somebody and mention something about their work from home setup that's really been kind of keeping them in the mud. And they've had to be working slower than they would have normally done and just either hadn't communicated it or didn't want to be a problem or something like that. So that's been sort of the biggest eye-opener for us is we've got to make sure our IT team, who's more than happy to do it, is on the phone with every single one of those people, making sure that everything is going as well as it should, not just okay for them.
Right. Because it's not Monica's 6 weeks, unfortunately.
No.
It's not.
No.
It's not. But Monica, you did touch on something really interesting, and that is the thought that productivity doesn't seem to have been as impacted as much as maybe one might have thought prior to all this, right? You're seeing more hours, you're seeing more billable hours, more productivity from maybe from a deliverable standpoint. So I guess in my head, we're losing maybe efficiency or maybe even potentially quality because of the lack of collaboration or the lack of close collaboration or the imperfections in the collaboration workflow. But we're seeing an uptick in actual raw effort hours. Is that accurate, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I guess I have to jump in because I wouldn't see it as a diluting the quality or the collaborative, aspect of it. In fact, it's interesting because you are able to carefully schedule every hour, literally, of your day. There's a lot of meetings going on, and it really forces everybody on the team to get on that meeting. So I think collaboration is kind of heightened in terms of team collaboration, project quality, not missing deadlines. It's really more on the social side, I would say. Like you said, the water cooler talk and being able to go grab coffee with somebody and bounce an idea off of them without having to formally schedule a Ring Central call or formally schedule, 15 minutes of your day. I mean, there's a lot that you do. I'm sure all of you on this call get a lot done by just doing a quick loop around the office and touching base with, 5 or 6 people along the way. Whereas now it's a little bit different, and it's a little bit more formal than it was prior when you're in the office physically.
So does that resonate with the others on the, like, are you seeing an uptick in company efficiency in production? And
it depends how you measure it, because I think there's a hidden inefficiency in the unplanned collaborative moments where I think so much of our decisions are made and a lot of ideas are generated. So I don't really want to see an uptick in work hours. I would like to see productive work hours, efficient work hours, but I don't want to see people working on, chained to their computer because it's easy. I make that mistake myself, and I try not to, and I try to set an example, but it's easy, right? We're sitting here and it's easy to do. I don't want to see that. I would like to see the efficiency, but I do think there's I can be incredibly productive in isolation. That's where I do my best work. But then what happens when I run out of tasks to do that I was very productive at doing? Those ideas, those tasks, I think come a lot from the unplanned interactions, not the collaborative scheduled things, but bumping into somebody in the kitchen or overhearing somebody next to me. Trisha, our CEO, who's my boss, we work within feet of each other, and things happen during the day because of that, and that's where my tasks, we'll call them, come from. And having been in the practice of architecture for over 30 years, that's how we operate as a business. We do our best work, I think, when we have those, unscheduled collaborative moments. That's where design happens. That's where ideas, are generated, and those things. So that's the stuff that can't be measured, and that's the part I think that after some time, I don't know what that amount of time is. I don't know if we've passed it already, where you start to see that kind of productivity go down, right? We all came out of the gates running. Everybody did great. They hit their milestones, right? Deadline. It was awesome. And then what happens after that when we don't have those casual interactions anymore?
Brendan, thoughts on that?
I echo what you're saying. I mean, we saw a little bit of both. There was a little bit of, in the beginning, at the outset, of course, if you haven't been used to working in an environment like this, there's a massive amount of sudden scheduling and phone calling, a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't have to do before. So a lot of our managers and leaders at the end of the day were like, oh, I feel like I'm working harder than I've ever worked before. And then after you've been through that for a little while, you start to realize what you need and what you don't, and the management of that scenario becomes a little bit better. I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag for us in terms of whether or not it's overall beneficial in the long run or a detriment in the long run in terms of the work from home scenario, because within the work from home scenario and the reliance on teams, things are being communicated up the food chain that never would have been communicated before, because people feel comfortable in an IM or something like that when they're not face to face, and there isn't a feeling of like, oh, I can't talk to Brendan or this partner or something about a little issue that may have been bothering them that may be also affecting other people. So we're hearing a lot about that type of stuff, little inconsistencies that if we iron out will actually be a great deal of benefit for other people. But then we are also hearing the lament about, there's a certain theatricality to the collaboration that is done within architecture, particularly around design when you're throwing ideas around and stuff like that. And that is absolutely much harder to do. So on the artistic sort of almost hard to measure side of things, it's definitely, people are lamenting that. Whereas on the other side, really hardcore sort of, well, we shouldn't keep this stuff here, we should move it over here, and maybe these details need to be fixed or whatever. A lot of that stuff is actually getting handled more than it had been when people were that time would have been consumed at the water cooler or things like that. So as John was saying, when he's done with kind of the tasks at hand, and then he has that, okay, what do I do next part? We're finding people are turning to long-standing small issues and kind of getting into them and fixing them, if that makes sense.
It does.
just
Sharon,
wanted
I
to
saw you nodding,
add-
talking about the work rate on project managers or managers in general. Are we the concept of the traditional sort of project manager role, and what they do and how they, they're embedded in the project bay, or, do you see that shifting? Do you see that where there's more work required by them to maintain the same level of cohesiveness, or, do you foresee any sort of change in what we traditionally ascribe to the PM role?
I have not seen anything that has really changed. I guess we've always been fairly structured in the management of our projects with weekly meetings, and now those weekly, or whatever they are, bi-weekly meetings, they're happening virtually instead of in person. So I'm not so sure that I see a huge change in the project management side, but what I would say is beyond the collaborative and artistic element that was mentioned, I think the mentoring aspect is another factor. From where I happen to physically sit in the office, I'm near some of our most senior architects who are routinely approached by younger architects for advice and asking, and all of the people around would then, benefit from whatever those answers were. And so I think that there's a definite concern about that sort of mentorship part being hindered by the way we're working now.
Do you think, is it safe to say, would you all agree that that sort of that workflow and that close, sometimes ad hoc collaboration, the lack of that is much more impactful in the early phases of design, conceptual design, and it lessens the negative impact of that lessens as things get more formalized and finalized? No, or is it consistent?
Definitely.
It's consistent throughout.
Construction administration is one of the areas where I hear that kind of mentorship type stuff the most. So definitely not just the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's start to finish, Mike, really, because, especially in architecture, you have the various stages, and each stage is going to require learning how it works, what is said. So many of us that have been in the profession for as long as we have, we've learned by watching, we've learned by listening, and you don't get that on a day-to-day basis if you're away from it. So I would say every step is required, and that interaction is required.
When I think about the mentoring challenges that we've been experiencing in the last, handful of half dozen years or so, they're not really all loaded at the front. They're coming, absolutely, Sharon, all the way into CA. And, when I started out in the practice 30 years ago, mentoring happened because I was drawing the deliverable and the guy managing me was looking over my shoulder. When we moved to AutoCAD, I was still drawing the deliverable in a way. It was on the screen, but it was a fair representation of the deliverable. And the manager could read it and understand it. And then we moved into a more, modeling world where I'm no longer really drawing the deliverable, and the manager can't quite read what I'm doing as the deliverable. So we had this disconnect between that, now causing a mentoring problem. And now we've removed completely, right? So now you can't even see what I'm modeling over my shoulder, let alone the deliverable and mentor at the same time. So yeah, I'm 100% with you, Sharon. I think that the big miss here is how do we continue to do this and mentor at I think certainly it's when we have people joining us, right out of school, they need it. But I think it goes all the way, right? I mean, people need to be mentored their entire, through the whole project.
So potentially, does it maybe make it easier? Because again, in my head, in the quote unquote old days, there's all day client charrette, and we're just going to go in the main room, and we're going to plaster everything up and work through this, and we're going to invite so and so and so who wouldn't maybe normally be invited, but we want it to be a learning experience or an exposure experience. But that's obviously limited. Those opportunities are limited, A, by the physical space in the room, and B, whether they're in the office that day or et cetera. Whereas now, theoretically, if you can create that virtual charrette, or if you could do some sort of collaboration online, then those physical restrictions are lifted. Is that?
I think a lot of the challenge, it really is on the individual. I mean, it's a sea change. I think one of the things that's fantastic about a charrette or things like that are, they're singular events and they're amazing. But I'd be hard pressed to say that my best thinking is done on a particular day that was scheduled with a whole bunch of other collaborators, because that's when the schedule was open and we could all get into a room for 8 hours. My best thinking, and a lot of people that I'm familiar with, their best thinking happens on a walk, in the shower, or ideas happen in other places. And the responsibility, I think, ends up falling back to the individual mentors and managers to capture that and then have to communicate it in a much more focused way than they would have had to when people are in the office. I think one of the things, in my experience, the first 8 years or so of my career, I worked at an international company that was kind of 24 hours, because we had offices from Australia through Europe and things like that. And it's been interesting to come into an environment like an architecture firm where it's almost kind of like you take for granted that people are just going to be around. So like when I have my idea, particularly if I'm a principal or somebody established at the firm, I can just step outside my office and say, hey, everybody, let's get in a room. And that's fantastic. And that's the way that the culture and the organizations have been built. But when you look forward, there is going to, if we have to stay in a mode like this and attract people who are going to be brought up in a mode like this, our leaders and mentors are going to have to be a bit more focused about, okay, I had these thoughts, I've written them down, and I'm going to put them together in a cohesive story that I can communicate in a setting like we're having right now in a meaningful way.
But my initial reaction to that is that that's very difficult to do.
Yeah, sure it is.
Principals in the firm, right, you have an established pattern of working that you've been doing maybe for 50 or even 60 years, right? And now all of a sudden you can't just step out your door anymore, right?
Yep.
So I think there's a really, for those staff members especially. So let's just say a year from now, so whatever today is, and this is recorded, so you're gonna be held to your prediction here. But a year from now, what percentage of the staff would you guesstimate is going to be coming into the office every single day?
You want to give us some parameters? What's happened a year from now?
Is there a vaccine?
So too many variables.
Let's just say COVID sort of dies out in March or so of next year. There's a vaccine, et cetera, and quote unquote life is
looks the way it did before February.
Yeah. What percentage of the staff do you think is that we're going to hang on to in this work from home sort of flex environment?
I'll go. I think I would like to think it's about a 70-30 split. I think that this event has been really, I would say, very positive overall, even though it came with a huge cloud and has a huge cloud of negativity relative to the health and many people that we've lost their lives. But there are a lot of things too that have impacted really kind of the way we view life and how we appreciate the things around us. And that has to do also with lifestyle. And I think that coming out of this, at least even immediately in our firm, I've seen people who would have never in a million years accepted that their staff was within, 20 feet away from them. I mean, they had to have them very close to it being okay that they can be home for 2 days a week or, 1 day a week and know that they have the confidence that their work is going to get done. So I think that it has enabled us to I think, understand that it's possible, that people don't have to be there 24/7 in order to be productive and get things done. So I think it will be a positive change overall for our work environment. And my prediction today, as of today, because it can change,
Yes.
disclaimer, is that it's about a 70-30 split.
Okay. Sharon, any
I
guesses?
was going to put it a little bit higher, more like 80 or 90, in the sense that I think we would still prefer that people come to the office. But what I think is going to happen, that, there's a segment of folks that prefer not to work in an office every day. And as we get back to quote unquote normal, those people may choose to want to work elsewhere, at places that provide more flexibility. And so I think that we're not going to be able to be maybe 100% anymore for that reason. In order to keep good people and attract good people, we may have to have a level of flexibility about this. And I do agree that things have changed forever, in the sense that we do now know that we can do it. It can be done. So, that can't really be put back in the bag, so to speak.
Yeah. Brennan?
Yeah, I would say, to look ahead a year, in my personal opinion, the most significant change of the past 4 months, and this may be a little bit clinical, is the willingness of leaders to entertain the concept of work from home. So I think somewhere between 70-30, 80-20, 75-25, around there is going to be probably how it breaks down, to me, for a lot of natural reasons. One of them are, I think this all depends on your culture's relationship to the financial bottom line of your firm. If there's any negative impact to people working at home, your firm's probably not going to tolerate it for very long. But, around 25% is about that capacity for variation that most people have within a work environment, where it doesn't get to the point where, Johnny's saying, well, Susie can and I can't, that type of thing. So I think right around that 70-30-ish is kind of where it's going to land. And the willingness will support that. It's all going to depend on the leadership, all of it.
And the bottom line.
And absolutely the bottom line.
Still a business.
Totally.
Still business. John?
Yeah, I'd have probably said anywhere from a fifth to a third of your staff will be out of the office on any given day. There are some roles that simply are not well suited for being out of the office, but then there are some roles that really don't need to be there. So we've been working for a while on long before February. How to accommodate that better, including people who might be, relocating to another state or have, family situations or something like that. And yeah, I think I don't know that any of us can accurately say what the percentage is going to be, but I'd probably come in somewhere says around, could be a fifth to a third on any given day. Fridays maybe just the place will be empty.
Yeah, I guess so. Are any of you thinking about that reduction in staff vis-a-vis the office space and reducing? Because for most firms, I think the lease overhead is one of the most significant costs. So has anybody even started entertaining the thought of a space reduction?
It's hard to say, because I think the nature of our space changes as well. I think and I'm not really talking so much about distancing as much as maybe accommodating more collaborative spaces and hot seating and things like that. I think we really have to think about what the office environment looks like with a more transient workforce before we can say what the size of it is.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think that's probably a fairly good note to end on. I was going to ask in general, because I just have a really hard.
Sounds like you're about to.
I have a really hard time and I've told this before, but every single architecture firm I've ever gone into, architects, engineers, designers, it's everybody has, aside from the exposed ceiling, don't get me started on that. Everybody has a U-shaped project bay, right? There's a probably a U-shaped project bay, and in the middle of the project bay, there's a files table, big flat surface to lay plans out on. And there's just something about the collaborative nature of having the people on the project in very close proximity, and the ability to throw a set of plans on the table and get people around the table and look at them and redline them right there, right? I just have a really hard time trying to understand that we can replicate that through technology, say, or through some other sort of workflow. But what I'm hearing is that it's really not as bad as I'm making it out to be. It's an overcomable challenge.
But Mike, isn't it true? And I don't know what the others think, but I don't think we've said that it goes away. I mean, if anything, it's definitely here to stay. We can work part-time, possibly, partially from home, but having that collaborative environment and that idea-making experience is essential to a creative industry, including architecture. I mean, I don't see that going away, at least for me.
There's still going to be that need to gather around the campfire?
Absolutely, no question.
I think there is definitely a physical aspect to it. I work better with a pen in my hand. I collaborate better when I'm, person to person. I think there's a physical aspect to it. I don't know that it's going to be as prevalent as all.
I think the thing that you get more when you're in person-to-person contact is you really get the holistic perspective of the individual who's communicating, because you see their body language, whether there's tension in their voice or excitement in their voice, which doesn't always necessarily come across particularly accurately in a digital format. And I think in terms of the work, yes, you could get buildings into the sky and redesign offices without ever having to be in the same environment. But the human impact that architecture, the potential for human impact that architecture has, is fed by the in-person collaboration when a project is being born and in the design elements. And that translates all the way out to the first person to walk through the door of the new building or whatever it is. And I think if you take that out, the experiences that people have with our buildings will change.
And I think also it is the whole notion that the culture of a company would be very, very different if we were not physically able to be together in one place. And, to the extent that we feel that our office culture is a factor in why people want to work with us beyond just the types of buildings that we're building, it seems to me it's hard to fathom if it were like this, how new employees coming into a situation would experience the culture of the office and how we're going to maintain it.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
That's a great note to wrap up on. I want to thank you so much for participating. Hopefully this was informative. This will be shareable within your firms and externally. So I just want to say thank you very much, and I appreciate all your knowledge and input.
Pleasure
Thank
talking
you,
with you
Mike,
all.
for the invitation. Good to meet you, Brendan, Sharon, and John.
Likewise.
Likewise.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks.